Rome loved to boast of its marble arches, its aqueducts pouring clean water, its philosophers preaching virtue. But the hidden cost wasn't measured in stone, it was measured in bodies. Thousands of girls captured in war or sold by their families were dragged into cubicles smaller than a prison cell. Rome called itself the beacon of civilization. In truth, its empire ran on flesh. Who really paid for Rome's glory? The chronicles are silent, but the graffiti scratched on brothel walls, the bones in mass pits, and the ledgers of slave traders still whisper the answer. If you value the historical record, subscribe, because when the ledger closes, the bones still speak. Picture the contradiction. A city that raised the Colosseum to honor discipline and strength. Yet down the narrow alleys of the Subura ran another empire, an empire of exploitation. The Lupanar Rome's infamous brothel district was not hidden shame, but open commerce. Stone phalluses carved into walls pointed the way as casually as signs to markets or baths. Families walked past with children. Senators strolled by after debates, and foreign tourists were told that no visit to Rome was complete without seeing its pleasure houses. The hypocrisy was staggering. For the girls trapped inside, there was no choice. Some were prisoners of war dragged from conquered villages. Others were sold by desperate parents during famine. Many were simply born into slavery, inheriting their mother's bondage like a curse written into their skin. Once inside, their identities were stripped away. A hot iron left scars that said property. New names replaced old ones. Julia, Claudia, or Livia vanished, replaced by Rose, Little Dove, or a crude nickname. Rome's brothels did not lack supply. The empire's wars were factories of human bodies, and each victory parade through the streets of the capital was not just a spectacle of trophies and chained men. It was a conveyor belt of women and children funneled into a waiting market. For the generals, captives were numbers counted in ledgers. For the city, they were commodities. The funnel had 3 mouths. First, conquest. Every frontier war from Gaul to Judea produced thousands of enslaved women. Roman soldiers knew the unofficial spoils policy, gold and silver enriched the state, but the bodies of women enriched the rank and file. Columns that later lined the forum carried the names of campaigns. They did not carry the names of the girls dragged behind. Second, poverty. Even within Rome's walls, desperation could be monetized. Families too poor to feed children sometimes sold daughters into slavery. It was not whispered, it was open commerce. Parents who starved weighed survival in cold arithmetic, one girl for the lives of many. Roman slave traders hovered over famine districts like crows, their ledgers as sharp as any sword. In those moments, hunger itself became Rome's recruiting officer. Third inheritance. Children born to enslaved mothers were legally enslaved from birth. They had no chance to run, no memory of freedom, no identity to erase. They belonged to the empire before they could even speak. For Rome, this was efficiency. No need to invade when reproduction created new inventory. The empire's cruelty was not improvisation. It was sustainable supply chain management. But supply was nothing without sorting. And this is where Rome's cruelty turned public. The slave market was not a shameful alley, it was theatre. Auction blocks were set in open squares with crowds watching as if it were a circus act. Girls stood stripped, rotated like livestock, their hair yanked to prove health, their mouths pried open to check teeth. Customers, soldiers, farmers, senators, shouted bids while children looked on. Rome did not hide this humiliation, it performed it. The branding was next. A hot iron pressed to thigh or shoulder left scars that outlived childhood, announcing property status to all. The pain was not the end, but the beginning of erasure. To run was impossible because the body itself carried the mark. Branding was not only physical, it was psychological, a permanent reminder that identity had been burned away. Then came the renaming. Julia became Lupa Wolfgirl. Claudia became Dove. Some were reduced to numbers or crude jokes carved into ledgers. Names that once tied them to families, villages, gods, all erased in a moment of bureaucratic cruelty. It was not enough to enslave the body. Rome needed to enslave memory. Each auction was economic ritual dressed as public entertainment. The crowd enjoyed humiliation as spectacle. Traders catalogued women by youth, by complexion, by accent, even by ethnicity, transforming human diversity into fetishized currency. Greek, Gaulish, Syrian words that once denoted culture were now eroticized labels, marketing tags for sale. The erasure of personhood was deliberate. To reduce a girl to a menu item was to make her infinitely replaceable. The Romans prided themselves on legal order. Yet, in these markets, law was the accomplice. The sales were recorded in official contracts, the branding sanctioned by legal codes, the renaming entered in public ledgers. Bureaucracy lent the cruelty legitimacy. The city that debated virtue in the Senate turned humiliation into paperwork. And the scale was staggering. Historians estimate that in the height of the empire, nearly a third of Rome's population were enslaved, and a significant portion of enslaved women were funneled into sex labor. Think about the arithmetic. Every Roman banquet boasting 10 noble guests required dozens of enslaved servants, and likely several captive girls gifted as entertainment. Rome's appetite was not occasional, it was systemic. This was the hidden economy of conquest. While marble arches celebrated generals, the brothels of the Subura profited. The soldiers were the suppliers, the traders were the logisticians, the senators were the customers. Everyone profited except the girls themselves. The spectacle of humiliation was not a flaw in the system. It was the system. Pause and consider a city that could invent aqueducts. And concrete also invented this economy of flesh. Was it simply vice, or was it governance? The auctions did not just transfer ownership. They trained society to view women as commodities, conditioned citizens to accept humiliation as entertainment, and encoded cruelty into the rituals of daily life. The brothel economy could not have existed without this constant spectacle of capture and supply. It was Rome's ritual of power. Every iron brand a sermon, every auction a parade, every renaming a declaration. Civilization and cruelty entwined. But the question remains unresolved. Were these markets merely Rome's dark indulgence? Or were they the scaffolding of control on which the empire itself was built? Step inside Rome's lupanar, and the illusion of civilization crumbles. The walls that tourists now admire for faded frescoes were once the industrial signage of an empire of flesh, each painting a menu, each cubicle a workstation. This was not chaos, not wild indulgence in the shadows. It was structured exploitation running with the precision of a factory. The physical architecture told the truth. A narrow corridor lined with tiny rooms, each cell barely large enough for a wooden bed frame or a heap of straw. No doors, only curtains thin enough that sound and smell seeped through. Privacy was not just denied, it was mocked. Customers heard the cries of the girl next door as they entered. Her suffering was part of the ambience. On the walls above each cubicle, frescoes advertised specific acts. To an illiterate client, pictures replaced contracts. You pointed, you paid, you entered. In Pompeii, archaeologists uncovered murals of couples mid-act, painted in lurid detail, as if the walls themselves were shouting, "This is the menu, and the girl inside will provide it." The girls had no voice in this advertisement. Their bodies were the merchandise, their consent irrelevant. The wall had spoken for them, and graffiti Rome's Yelp. Scratched into plaster, customers left crude reviews. "I had her. She was good." Others mocked or degraded particular girls, etching permanent humiliation into the architecture. Imagine a teenager forced into a cell, reading the scrawled words of strangers, announcing her worth to the next man who entered. It was humiliation layered on exploitation memory, preserved as ridicule. Food and drink were rations, not rewards. Bread and watered beer were calculated precisely, not for comfort, but for efficiency. Just enough calories to keep the body working, not enough to keep the spirit alive. Archaeological digs near Pompeii's brothels uncovered carbonized loaves of rough bread and amphorae of sour beer. The industrial fuel of a machine that consumed lives. To the owners, feeding a girl was no different than oiling a cart's axle. Disease spread like a second currency. Rome had aqueducts, but its brothels were petri dishes. No knowledge of bacteria, no medicine, but superstition. Girls were forced to keep working through sores, fevers, infections. Those who became too sick were not nursed. They were replaced. The Roman economy always had new supply from new wars, new poverty, new inheritances of bondage. One broken girl discarded another, slotted into the curtain next door. The hours were endless. A girl might see dozens of men in a single day. There were no shifts, no rest days. Brothel owners measured value in throughput. The human body was treated like a tool to be worn down, then discarded when it lost utility. Life expectancy was brutally short. Late teens, perhaps early 20s. Rome's pleasure economy was in truth a death sentence disguised as entertainment. And yet the hypocrisy ran deeper still. Outside these cells, Rome boasted of virtue. Senators thundered about family honor. Philosophers praised restraint, generals invoked discipline. But at night, those same men pulled back the curtains. Public morality was theater. Private vice was infrastructure. The contradiction was not hidden, it was institutionalized. Rome needed its brothels. They functioned as both outlet and warning. The structure of exploitation was chillingly efficient. Consider the psychological design girls renamed, branded, mocked in graffiti, forced to perform beneath frescoes that turned their trauma into artwork. The system erased individuality, replaced it with categories. Dove, Rose, Gaulish, Syrian. These labels weren't names, they were consumer tags. Rome was not merely brutal, it was bureaucratically brutal. And all of this was visible. Brothels were not hidden in Rome. They sat near markets, taverns, and bathhouses. Prostitutes were advertised with carved phalluses pointing the way. Tourists came to see them. Families passed them openly. This was not a shameful secret, it was a civic feature integrated into urban planning. The empire did not just tolerate its brothel system, it flaunted it. Inside, the girls lived in constant awareness of their disposability. They were not supposed to survive long. Their exhaustion, their sickness, their despair were part of the business model.